In less than 24 hours, everything Camilla believed she owned was quietly and systematically erased. The defining moment did not happen in front of flashing cameras or cheering crowds. It happened at the security gate of a sprawling private royal estate where a simple red error light on an access reader signaled the end of a 30-year illusion. What Camilla realized sitting in the back of a black luxury vehicle while security guards awkwardly avoided her gaze was that she had just been locked out. She was locked out physically, financially, and institutionally. The gates of the empire had closed, and she was standing on the outside. This is the story of the most staggering institutional retaliation in modern royal history. It is the story of a secret power grab attempted in the shadows of a king's declining health, how Prince William and Princess Anne uncovered the forensic paper trail, and the silent, ruthless retaliation that followed. By the end of this, you will understand the devastating realization that struck Camilla behind closed doors. Despite the crown on her head and the title before her name, she actually owns absolutely nothing. To understand the magnitude of this collapse, you have to understand how untouchable Camilla felt right before the trap snapped shut. For 3 decades, she played the longest and most calculated game in royal history. She endured the public outrage. She survived the backlash of Princess Diana's tragic death. She moved with agonizing patience from the mistress in the shadows to the official companion to the wife, to the queen consort, and finally to the queen. Over the years, she successfully built an illusion of absolute power. She systematically worked to erase Diana's legacy from the palace walls, locking away portraits burning. Fresh flowers and replacing the old guard of staff with loyalists who owed their careers entirely to her. Recently, as King Charles faced severe health struggles, Camilla elevated herself to the ultimate gatekeeper. She controlled who saw the monarch, what memos reached his desk, and how his daily schedule was structured. She began acting less like a supporting spouse and more like a shadow sovereign. In this vacuum of power, she felt invincible. And with that invincibility came a staggering level of commercial desperation. Camilla knew that a crown by marriage does not guarantee a permanent empire. She knew that the moment Charles was no longer on the throne, her institutional relevance would evaporate overnight. She needed hard assets. She needed property's financial security and a permanent royal foothold for her own non-royal children that could survive long beyond her husband's reign. This is where the secret power grab began, taking advantage of a period when the king was particularly frail, heavily medicated and detached from the daily administrative burdens of the crown. Camilla set into motion a massive administrative transfer. She attempted to secure a permanent multi-generational lease on a sprawling luxury estate for her son, entirely funded by the royal portfolio. She deliberately bypassed the standard estate management office. She moved the paperwork through a secondary channel, assuming her formidable title would terrify any low-level clerk into processing the documents without asking difficult questions. She wanted an unshakable financial fortress for her bloodline, heavily subsidized by the institution she had spent her life infiltrating. But Camilla fundamentally misunderstood how modern royal wealth is structured, and more importantly, she underestimated the cold forensic discipline of the man who now controls it. Prince William is the Duke of Cornwall. He alone owns the duchy. He controls the vast billion-dollar real estate portfolio, the agricultural lands, the payroll, and the massive financial engine that funds the private lives of the royal family. William does not just hold a title, he holds the checkbook. When the unusual lease paperwork crossed the desk of a senior duchy auditor, it was immediately flagged and hand-delivered to William's private office. For a man who had spent 25 years carrying the silent, enduring grief of watching his mother stripped of her titles and pushed to the edges of the family, this was the moment everything crystallized. William did not scream, he did not throw a tantrum, he did not leak a furious story to the tabloids about his stepmother's greed. That is not how true power operates. Instead, William sat down with his financial team and Princess Anne. Princess Anne, whose fierce protection of the crown is legendary, and whose own disdain for Camilla dates back 50 years to when Camilla interfered with Anne's own romantic future. Together, William and Anne did not plot a screaming match. They plotted an administrative execution. They went through the duchy charters dating back hundreds of years. They reviewed every single property access rule, every financial clause, and every security protocol. They ensured that every single countermeasure they were about to deploy was absolute, irreversible, and perfectly legal. They weaponized the very system Camilla thought she controlled. The execution of this plan was terrifying in its silence. Camilla had arranged for her family to visit the estate that weekend to quietly celebrate the acquisition and begin moving their personal belongings into the property. The vehicles arrived at the private iron gates, expecting them to swing open as they always did. Instead, the vehicles were stopped. The security detail employed directly by the Duchy of Cornwall and answering strictly to the Prince of Wales approached the car. With chilling politeness, the guards informed the occupants that their names had been removed from the access registry. The lease had been officially voided by the absolute authority of the Duke of Cornwall. The royal funding had been permanently blocked. Furthermore, all access privileges to duchy properties for non-working royals had been revoked across the board, effective immediately. There was no negotiation, there was no manager to call. What looked like a routine administrative update at a security gate was actually a total dismantling of Camilla's financial empire. The paper trail had been severed, the property was locked, the money was gone. Sitting in that vehicle, Camilla experienced a level of humiliation she had not felt in decades. The side door had been slammed shut. The realization washed over her with sickening clarity. She had spent 30 years manipulating a man to get a crown, but she had failed to realize that the son she had dismissed now owned the very ground she walked on. William had used the silent machinery of the institution to completely destroy her plan without raising his voice once. He had protected his family, Catherine's future, and Diana's legacy with a stroke of a pen. Humiliated and burning with a rage, staff members later describe it as frightening. Camilla ordered her driver to return to the palace immediately. She stormed through the corridors, ignoring the protocols, and marched straight past the private secretaries. She walked directly into King Charles's private study. She was fully prepared to demand that William be stripped of his authority over the duchy. She was ready to demand that her husband use his absolute sovereign power to crush his son's insubordination and restore her property. She stood before the king, demanding he make the phone call and be the man who had torn the monarchy apart to protect her for 30 years. But as she delivered her ultimatum, the atmosphere in the room completely shifted, and what happened next would break her reality forever. Camilla stood in the center of the king's private study, fully expecting the man behind the desk to do what he had always done. For over 3 decades, Charles had been her ultimate shield. He had defied his mother, he had alienated the British public, and he had sacrificed the emotional well-being of his own children all to ensure that Camilla was protected, elevated, and eventually crowned. She waited for the familiar indignation. She waited for him to summon his private secretary to draft a royal command and to force his son into submission. But as the seconds stretched into an agonizing silence, Camilla realized something was terribly wrong. Charles did not reach for the phone. He did not call for his aides. He simply looked at her with the weary resignation of a man who no longer had the strength to fight the inevitable. When Charles finally spoke, his voice was low and completely stripped of the defensive fire that had characterized his youth. He told her there was nothing he could do. He told her that the Duchy of Cornwall belonged entirely to William, and that the sovereign had no legal or constitutional authority to override the Duke on matters of private estate management. But the devastating blow was not just legal, it was deeply, profoundly psychological. Charles was not just citing protocol, he was making a choice. For the first time in his life, he was choosing the stability of the institution and the authority of his heir over the demands of his wife. He was allowing the trap William set to remain closed. In that suffocating silence, the terrifying reality of Camilla's commercial desperation finally crystallized. To the outside world, a queen consort appears to possess unimaginable wealth. She lives in palaces, she travels in private royal trains, and she wears diamonds that are virtually priceless. But behind the velvet curtains, the forensic truth of royal wealth is entirely different. The palaces belong to the state, the crown jewels belong to the nation. The Duchy of Lancaster, which funds the monarch, belongs to the sitting sovereign. Camilla, as an individual, owns almost nothing. Aside from a private home in Wiltshire, she possesses no sovereign wealth, no vast agricultural estates, and no independent billion-dollar trust funds. She had spent 30 years fighting for a title, failing to realize that titles do not write checks. The moment Charles is no longer on the throne, Camilla becomes a dowager queen. At that precise moment, every aspect of her existence, her security detail, her housing allowance, her travel budget, and her access to royal properties will be entirely at the discretion of the new king. She will be a tenant in an empire entirely owned and operated by the son of the woman she spent decades trying to erase. That is why the secret lease for her family mattered so much. It was her final desperate attempt to siphon hard institutional assets into her own bloodline before the hourglass ran out, and William had severed the pipeline with a single administrative keystroke. While Camilla scrambled in the shadows for a financial lifeboat, a very different kind of power was quietly solidifying. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, was taking her rightful place at the absolute centre of the new royal order. The contrast between the two women could not be more devastating. Camilla's power was built on manipulation, secret alliances, and a frantic grasp for control. Catherine's power was built on 20 years of uncomplaining endurance, fierce loyalty, and an unshakable connection to the British public. Catherine never demanded permanent leases for her family. She never attempted to rewrite estate charters in the dark. She simply did the work. And because she did the work, the institution rushed to protect her in a way it never would for Camilla. You can see this new order manifesting in subtle, undeniable shifts across the royal landscape. These are not loud announcements. They are the quiet, devastating corrections of institutional protocol. Viewers with a sharp eye have noticed the changes at recent state events. The positioning of the senior royals has subtly physically shifted. Catherine is increasingly placed in the center frame, drawing the cameras and the diplomatic weight, while Camilla is frequently positioned in ways that feel purely ceremonial. The distribution of significant royal jewels has also changed. Pieces from Queen Elizabeth's private collection and highly symbolic pieces once worn by Princess Diana are appearing exclusively on Catherine. These are not accidents. In the silent language of the British monarchy, who wears what and who stands where as the ultimate forensic proof of who holds the future. Princess Anne's unwavering alignment with William only cements this reality. The royal family operates like a massive corporate entity, and the board of directors has clearly made its decision. Anne, the hardest working royal and the keeper of the old guard's respect, recognizes that William and Catherine are the only viable future the monarchy has. By standing with William as he dismantled Camilla's secret lease, Anne was sending a message that resonated through every corridor of Buckingham Palace. The era of the shadow sovereign was over. The bloodline was securing the gates. Camilla walked out of the king's study that day completely transformed. She walked in as a queen who believed she controlled the board. She walked out carrying the chilling realization that she was merely a guest whose lease was rapidly expiring. William had not just stopped a real estate transaction, he had executed a flawless psychological victory. He had reminded Camilla that he holds the master, keys to the castles, to the vaults, and to the future. He had avenged his mother not by screaming to the press, but by weaponizing the absolute unyielding power of the crown. And the most devastating part of it all for Camilla is that she cannot complain. She cannot give an interview. She cannot claim she is a victim. To the public, she remains the queen. But behind the ancient stone walls, she knows exactly what she is: powerless. If you found this deep dive into the hidden dynamics of the royal family insightful, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video. We specialize in looking past the tabloid noise to uncover the true institutional chess games being played behind palace doors. Let me know in the comments below if you think Prince William was right to use his authority this way, and I will see you in the next analysis.